Hello and welcome back to the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. We're jumping ahead to game 3 in the match between Lasker and Miniati. I couldn't find any contemporary notes for game number 2 as it was a rather long draw, so I decided that we would skip ahead to a game that is incredibly interesting as it features an opening debuted all the way back in the 1600s by none other than Greco himself. Very interesting stuff. Let's get to work. With white, Lasker once again opens e4, and this time Miniati pushes his pawn forward not one but two squares with e5. Lasker in turn responds with the most romantic-ist opening known to man, f4, and Miniati declines this king's gambit with bishop to c5, the third most popular move behind, of course, accepting and declining the gambit with d5, initiating Falkbeer's counter gambit. After knight to f3, d6, and c3, knight to f6 is the most popular move, and the contemporary analysts were discussing the merits of bishop to g4. However, Miniati's move of queen to e7 is not necessarily a new move. Unfortunately for him, it was featured on the wrong side of two of Greco's games, which should probably tell you something. Now, the purpose of queen to e7 is to stop white from playing d4, because at the end of the line, the e4 pawn hangs. However, Lasker is clearly studied up on his Greco, because he played a d4 anyway. And after e captures d4, c captures d4, it's mandatory that here black plays the move bishop to b6. Miniati instead continued with his plan and played queen captures on e4, unfortunately falling right into Greco's trap. The point behind all of this is that white simply plays king to f2, and this bishop is stuck. Now, of the two games that Greco played, one of them saw his opponent play bishop to b6. After bishop to b5 check, if you block this check, then rook to e1 picks up the queen, while after Greco's opponent's move of king to d8, rook to e1 doesn't necessarily win the queen by force. His opponent played queen to f5, and Greco gave mate with rook to e8. The other game saw bishop to b4, but this resulted in the exact same position after a3, bishop a5, b4, and bishop to b6. Greco once again gave bishop to b5 check, king to d8, rook to e1, queen to f5, and once more rook to e8 with checkmate from Greco. So the worst case scenario is that black simply gets checkmated. Miniati went with the best case scenario and just gave up his bishop. So bishop captures on d4, knight captures on d4. We are 8 moves in, and Lasker has already won a piece. Now, Miniati does have 2 pawns in exchange for the piece, and Lasker's king is far from optimally placed. But one more problem that Miniati faces is that his queen is actually going to be a liability in the upcoming moves. Now, as far as the database is concerned, knight to f6 has also been played here. Miniati's move of knight to e7 is the novelty, so it is as of move 8 that the players are playing a unique game. Now, before Miniati can organize any attacks, he has to deal with the fact that his queen is very exposed. Lasker develops knight to c3, kicking this queen back to g6, bishop to d3, and queen to f6, hitting the knight. The knight moves away with tempo to b5, hitting the c7 pawn, which is, as usual, defended with knight to a6, and now knight to e4. Miniati gives queen to h4 check, but this is blocked with g3, queen to h3, and knight to g5 even. This puts the queen on g4, where Miniati offers a trade. Now, white is completely winning after pretty much every move. Even trading the queens is completely fine for white here. The Greco way of finishing this game would probably be to sacrifice on d6. Knight captures d6, c captures d6, and once more bishop to b5 with check. The c8 bishop can't block because it has to defend the queen. This knight here can technically block, but rook to e1 check leads to basically checkmate. And if king to f8, then white can regain the material with queen captures on d6. White is already threatening checkmate with queen to d8. They can easily support this attack with, again, rook to e1 or perhaps rook to d1, depending on what black plays, and black is just completely busted here. Lasker didn't do anything like that. He simply retreated his bishop back to e2 and allowed Miniati to consolidate somewhat by retreating his queen back to d7. So finally, this queen is completely safe. Of course, it's not very well placed, blocking in the bishop and everything, but given that Miniati is already objectively lost, it's not like it can get much worse. Lasker continues his development with rook to e1, and finally, on move 16, Miniati finally castles. Lasker retreats his knight back to c3, and finally Miniati starts looking for some counterplay with knight to c5. After b4, this knight goes over to e6, offering a trade of knights. Now, white is allowed to trade on e6. There is certainly nothing objectively incorrect with this. I suppose you could be a little bit concerned that you've opened up the f file for attacks. And if you play a move like king to g1 getting off this file, then black can play queen to c6, taking the long diagonal, and again, there's nothing objectively to be worried about, but perhaps this is an unnecessary concession on the part of white. So Lasker instead continued developing with bishop to b2, and Miniati traded instead. Knight captures g5, f captures g5, and for his 20th move, Miniati makes the time control by giving a queen check on f5. Now this move doesn't really have any strategic benefits because this bishop blocks on f3 and is actually very well placed on the long diagonal. Miniati plays knight to c6, and now knight to d5 from Lasker. This hits the c7 pawn. Miniati prevents any taking with bishop to e6. Knight captures on c7 is technically possible, but after rook a to c8, this knight has to move back, let's say to d5, and now black simply takes on g5, and white hasn't actually won any material. So instead of that, Lasker plays a very forcing move in b5. This basically forces Miniati to trade the queens. This knight can't move because knight to e7 check is threatened. So he plays bishop captures on d5, queen captures on d5, queen captures d5, and bishop captures on d5. Now, Miniati has one last trick that he wants to try. He plays knight to b4, threatening knight to c2 and this bishop. Lasker stops both threats with bishop to e4, but now rook a to e8. Now, in this particular position, Lasker played the move pawn to a3, allowing Miniati's ultimate trick. So what I want you to do, pause the video, see if you can find the sequence that Miniati intended in order to get himself back into this game. All right, 3, 2, 1. The sequence is rather forcing. Rook captures on e4. After rook captures e4, Miniati forked the king and bishop with knight to d3, king to e2, and knight captures on b2. So Miniati is down the exchange, but he is up 2 pawns. Lasker's pawn structure isn't all that great as well. However, Lasker saw just a little bit deeper, and he allowed this trick because he has a correct rejoinder. I'll give you just a second to find it because it's not all that complicated. It's rook to b4. This knight is trapped, and now Miniati's about to just be down an entire rook. Now, the game is, for all intents and purposes, over. Miniati played for a few more moves, perhaps out of inertia. Rook to e8 check, king to d2, and rook to e5. Rook captures b2 and rook captures on g5, so Miniati at least has 3 pawns for the rook, but of course that's not nearly enough for any sort of compensation. After rook to c1, he even gave a trade with rook to c5, rook captures c5, d captures c5, and now king to d3. The point being that after king to f8, he first played king to c4, attacking the pawn. Miniati defended this with b6, but now rook to e2. The black king is cut off, and there's no way to stop the white king from simply marching up the light squares, picking off all of these pawns, and promoting to a queen. So it was here on move 37 that Nicholas Miniati resigned the game. So there we go, Lasker's first win in this short match. This is far from the most strategically interesting game we'll see, but I do think that it's kind of interesting to show these opening traps, especially as Lasker plays more and more professional and internationally acclaimed players. We're going to be seeing fewer of these, and I doubt we'll be seeing quite so many people falling into this trap after queen captures on e4. This was just a cute little historical tidbit I wanted to share. I hope you enjoyed. So not only does Lasker take the lead 1-0 in this match, but now because every draw counts as a half point, the pressure has especially been placed on Miniati's shoulder to win another game and equalize the score. There's a little bit more chess to look forward to, so I look forward to seeing you there. Until then.